Folks, I've got an urgent message for you today. The World Economic Forum is back, and they are pushing a radical new idea to completely reimagine our civilization and how we live as humans in Western countries. The idea is to put citizens into small 15-minute confinement communities, if you will, that make it so that you don't need to go more than 15 minutes out, and thus if you're just staying within your own little zone, then you can't pollute and you don't have a lot of the other problems that come with excess movement. What should we know about these exciting measures, and when can we expect them to be implemented? Number 2, household debt just saw its largest increase in decades. If you follow mainstream media, you probably think this is a good thing. It's not, and it's actually worse than it looks. And it explains why inflation also is not getting under control, and why the reports are heading upwards again. Let's get right to work. I'll put the timestamps down below. The first story today is over at the World Economic Forum. They, alongside the United Nations and a host of other global organizations, are prescribing a new idea to solve society's problems and usher in a great reset, the latest plan of which they call the 15-minute city. The idea is that instead of having big Western cities where businesses and things that you need are all over the place and there's a lot of urban sprawl, instead of having that, it would be much, much better to have really, really small 15-minute compartmentalized societies that are all built around the home. Ones where people are perhaps assigned to certain zones and you have everything you need within 15 minutes, whether that's work, groceries, doctors, a library, whatever else you may need. Maybe you have digital IDs to make sure that you're staying within your zone. Maybe you don't. Who knows? Now, small, tight-knit communities that have everything that you need within a small, confined environment. Well, that might sound like a prison, but don't you worry, it's actually a green utopia. This is the actual graphic they have on their website with the idea. It looks like a pretty nice fairy tale. If we can simply confine ourselves to small spaces, we can grow better community ties, according to this graphic. By restricting human movement within individual government-crafted community zones, it saves all the emissions and resource use from people who would otherwise make travel to other communities, or even worse, other states and countries. Obviously, that creates a lot of emissions, right? And if you're just going for fun or, God forbid, for business, those are things that could really, really pollute. This plan, if implemented in its entirety, would eventually completely get rid of the need to have car travel or plane travel at all. Of course, you'd still want the government and different global organizations to have access to cars and planes, because they'll have to go around and make sure all the different communities are following these guidelines. But aside from them, people like you and I, we won't need those things. We could just stay within the 15-minute zone. According to this organization, this is a critical thing that needs to happen as soon as possible. If you go onto the World Economic Forum website, it says, as climate change and global conflict cause shocks and stresses at faster intervals and increasing severity, the 15-minute city will become even more critical. Now, who supports this? Well, according to France24.com, supporters of 15-minute cities include the worldwide C40 Cities Alliance, plus the United Nations, and of course the World Economic Forum. C40, of course, include most major cities in the world and most major cities in the US, like your New York, your Los Angeles, your San Fran, and so forth. Now, of course, there's different takes on this new societal goal. Some people say this is necessary, others are concerned. Some are arguing this new city design is essentially putting humans on a 15-minute leash and are essentially climate lockdowns. Others are arguing that, oh no, the World Economic Forum elites are just trying to redesign cities to be more efficient, and it's going to be mostly voluntary restriction of travel, if any restriction of travel. You simply won't need to leave the community because everything will be nearby. If you make a community where people don't have to leave, then they won't, is the idea that they're preaching here. And I get it. Every time you put out an idea, some people are going to go and jump to conclusions as to what that idea could escalate into. And perhaps that could be a conspiracy theory, perhaps it could not be. And I personally am not against greening anything. I just think the way that you green is very, very important. It needs to be practical, it needs to not infringe on freedoms, and it needs to be an innovation, not just something that you're like, okay, well, if we just take away the abilities that you have right now, then all of a sudden things are going to be more climate friendly. If you're going to say, for example, we need to get rid of all cars, well, you need to go and figure out how you're going to replace what the car was able to do before. Do you have a new transportation device that's like teleportation? That would be fine. I would much rather teleport and not have to sit in traffic. But if your idea is let's stay confined in a small city with communities that have been built by government, that might be something that I'm like, you know what, maybe I don't need that. Maybe I'd rather sit in traffic. Let's just take an impartial look at this, or at least as impartial as I can be. be. If policymakers are going to be convinced by the World Economic Forum, which has convinced a lot of policymakers around the world to already start implementing smaller versions of this, and of course to implement a lot of other policies that they've had ideas of the last 20, 30 years, and especially in 2020, but I'm not going to say anything about that. If policymakers are going to be convinced to rip up current cities and invest tons into building individual 15-minute circle ghettos for people, would it be a big jump to assume it won't be that hard to also convince them to actually restrict movement within those cities? Once you've already spent billions of dollars to reimagine cities, well, all of a sudden, the policymakers are going to be like, wait, okay, well, why won't you lock down in those 15-minute areas? We built everything that you need. Are you not willing to confine yourself for the climate and your children? And folks, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. When this happens, they'll probably be believing that they're doing the right thing. And I know what you're thinking, Charlie, I'd be absolutely fine. I'd even be happy to lock down so that my kids can experience the wonders of a slightly colder winter. And obviously, we can't allow Patagonia to have less sales. I mean, if it's warmer in some areas of the world, then they're not going to sell as many jackets. And hey, I mean, come on, at least they're letting us out of the house with this design. We should be happy. Usually they're like, hey, you got to keep it within a house. Some of the riders of different proposals in different regions have come out and said ways this could be implemented. For example, the goal of Oxford's, according to one of the riders, is that in your appointed zone, you will have everything you need and you will be originally fined for too many trips out of your approved zone. But they are friendly in that they'll actually let you leave your zone sometimes. You just have to pay a fee.
The idea is that everybody will live within 15 minutes of the things they need. 15 minutes of a school, 15 minutes of a doctor's, 15 minutes of a supermarket. And if you want to travel to the other zones in your city, or maybe soon your town, you will have to go out an approved route.
Now, I want to be completely clear. I understand how it works. If you criticize anything from the World Economic Forum, you are considered a disgruntled conspiracy theorist who just can't get on board, so you must be discredited immediately. So I just want to say, personally, I think that the 15-minute zone is a great idea. I think that we should have 1-minute zones. Why allow 14 minutes of extra polluting? That way we can make sure that there's not any excess pollution. And it will greatly increase community ties, which is very, very important. I think it's going to be a lot more equitable of a society. Here are some prominent reactions from Twitter. Dr. Jordan Peterson, who has a right-leaning perspective, said, quote, "The idea that neighborhoods should be walkable is lovely. The idea that idiot, tyrannical bureaucrats can decide by fiat where you're allowed to drive is perhaps the worst imaginable perversion of that idea. And make no mistake, it's part of a well-documented plan." Now, to keep it a little bit more balanced, on the other side, you have Will Norman, who is on the left and works under the mayor of London. He's saying this: "These 15-minute city conspiracy theories are absolutely insane. Who wouldn't want to live somewhere where it is safe and convenient to visit friends, family, shops, and local amenities?" And this argument that he's making is, hey, perhaps the ends justify the means here. Perhaps, it wouldn't be too bad for us all to be kind of confined in a zone because we're all going to have closer connections to one another and it's going to be simpler. Obviously, if we're all within a certain zone, that's going to breed a lot of camaraderie with people that otherwise we wouldn't have had much with. Sure, you might not be able to see as many people in other zones, and you got to hope and pray that your extended family gets allocated to your zone, but obviously it depends on what the government thinks is best. But at least within your zone, you're going to have a lot stronger of a community. Again, 15-minute cities sound like a great idea, but 1-minute cities sound a lot better. And I think that's what we need to do to potentially save our Earth from potential problems potentially down the road. At the same time, I think we should continue to completely ignore the practical ways that we could save the environment. For example, making sure that we don't allow for proven and controlled nuclear energy, which is very, very, very environmentally friendly as long as it's well controlled. And I also think that we should make sure that we're continuing to buy from our frenemy countries that pollute like mofos. Let's ban dirty energy in Western countries that have standards for their production, and let's buy from all these other countries that have no standards for their production and use that money for war. That's usually against our interests. I think that is how we save the planet. We need as many government mandates as possible. I think the World Economic Forum should be given political power, direct political power in the United States. Thank God for the elites at the WEF because they have a lot more brains than we do, and we need to just trust what they prescribe to us because we don't know for ourselves. We can't think for ourselves. Okay, moving on. Alongside the red market, we've got some more news about this super duper strong, don't ever question it economy. Household debt climbed by $394 billion in Q4. That's the largest increase in household debt in 2 decades. Now, I know what you're thinking. Charlie, come on, are you telling me that we don't only have ballooning national debt, but we also have ballooning household debt? Can't we just not do this debt thing anymore? Why don't we learn our lesson? No, folks, we have a debt-based system. That's what they say, right? We have to borrow out our eyeballs, and then when the eyeballs are gone, we have to borrow our neighbor's eyeball and borrow out that one as well. The sum of money owed by U.S. households mounted during the fourth quarter, climbing $394 billion to $16.9 trillion. That's the largest Q-over-Q increase in household debt in 20 years, taking balances $2.75 trillion higher than at the end of 2019 before the pandemic. So in other words, the Fed's raising of borrowing costs has done little to stop borrowing thus far, and in fact, it's at a record rate quarter over quarter, more than we've seen again in 20 years. And this may explain why inflation isn't cooling off like it's supposed to. Credit card balances grew robustly in the fourth quarter, while mortgage and auto loan balances grew at a more moderate pace, reflecting activity consistent with pre-pandemic levels. Now, why would credit card balances grow and get carried month over month? Well, obviously because people aren't able to afford their daily expenses. And then folks will say, but Charlie, that's not possible. This economy is super strong. Just look at that low unemployment rate. Don't ask any other questions about the economy. Just look at the unemployment rate. That's low. That means economy equals great. Who cares that the unemployment rate doesn't measure the quality of the jobs that people are getting, or that it excludes people that haven't looked for a job in just 4 weeks? Well, apparently those two things actually do matter, and the quality of job and the amount that it pays actually does matter as well. Although historically low unemployment has kept consumers' financial footing generally strong, stubbornly high prices and climbing interest rates may be testing some borrowers' ability to repay their debts. And it's not just testing their ability to repay, they are increasingly not paying. Delinquencies picked up, with borrowers reaching 90 days or more of delinquency at a higher rate than they did before the pandemic. Now, the reason this is about to get even freakier is because you look at the total non-housing debt balance, one of the biggest segments is student loans. They've ballooned as well, but they are still in administrative forbearance under the Biden administration's directives. So people haven't even had to pay towards this, but they are already starting to default on their other debt. What happens when that forbearance ends? Well, you're going to have an entire demographic, an entire age demographic from 20 to 30, maybe even into the early 40s that are all of a sudden bankrupted. All of a sudden, everybody has toxic debt. These people have no money to spend to even live, and everybody gets screwed. Now, I don't know what the Supreme Court's going to decide on whether or not the student loan forgiveness was legal or not, but if it's not, all of a sudden, boom, you have a massive crisis on your hands. And look, if you go and you take out debt, there's obviously personal responsibility in that, right? It's your job to pay it back. But you can't ignore that we have a really screwed up system that encourages kids to take out tons and tons of debt, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, to get useless degrees, a lot of times in pottery, social justice degrees, some sort of random humanity art. I'm sure their heart is in the right place, or they're trying to follow their passion, which a lot of parents in America tell their kids. But the problem is a lot of these passions, they don't pay. If you are a normal person that is logical and going to college, you need to be encouraged to take a practical career route that is actually going to allow you to pay back your debt. Maybe that's engineering, maybe that's medicine, maybe that's business, although I don't know that I did the business route. I don't know that that's the most practical either, because you learn business from people that had never been in business. Or maybe that's skipping college and going to a trade school. In a lot of other countries, if you tell your parents you're going to go and pursue a degree in pottery, they're going to laugh right in your face. In this country here, though, they'll say, oh no, little Jimmy, he's following his passion. Isn't that beautiful? Okay, but that passion is most likely not going to pay after college. And you're going to be stuck in a dead-end job not related to your passion for the rest of your life, so that you could simply pay back the debt for those 4 years of learning about your passion. And unfortunately, a lot of these people are going to be screwed in this upcoming cycle, and it sucks. And hopefully we can do something to change the culture. But anyways, that's all we've got for you today. Let us know your thoughts down below, and we will see you in the next video. Make sure to sign up for our free ZipTrader research reports with your email down below. Click that first link and take advantage of that, because the next report is coming out very, very soon. They come out once a week. Have a good one, folks.